Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World, and many of you know that the mass incarceration epidemic is one of the great challenges, one of the great hurdles of the 21st century. I would argue that it is the new civil rights movement. If you're looking for an issue that you absolutely have to get behind as a person of color, this issue would be it. Now, the person I have on the line is Mr. Carl Dix. Mr. Carl Dix, he is the co-founder of the Stop Mass Incarceration Network, along with a man that many of you know, and I hope that you love him as much as I do, Dr. Cornel West. And first, I want to ask Mr. Dix, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good, Brother Boyce.
Good, good. Now, you have a website, stopmassincarceration.net. I was informed that you and Dr. West had gotten together along with Jerome McCory and many others and created a month of resistance. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, what we are doing is we have called for and are mobilizing a month of resistance to mass incarceration, police terror, repression, and the criminalization of a generation for October of this year. And this October is going to be a month of varied forms of resistance. It's going to begin with the publication of a call to stop mass incarceration, police terror, and the criminalization of a generation on October 1st. Then the first weekend of October, there are going to be sermons exposing the horrors of mass incarceration in hundreds of religious institutions all across the country. That's going to be followed by events on college campuses, including several major symposiums. That's going to be followed by cultural events that's going to bring together musicians, poets, spoken word artists, graphic artists, all kinds of different artists, again, targeting mass incarceration. There are going to be coordinated nationwide demonstrations against police brutality and police murder on October 22nd. And then we're going to wind the month up on October 30th as a day to wear orange in solidarity with the movement to stop mass incarceration. And we are aiming to involve tens of thousands of people in these varied forms of resistance and act in a way that will impact and move millions of people. Because we got to change the way that people look at the question of mass incarceration. You know, because people think about somebody's in jail, they say, well, he or she must have done something wrong. When the reality is that people are being criminalized, especially Black and Latino people and especially young people. You look at that video of Brother Eric Garner in Staten Island, standing there being accosted by a gang of cops, asking him, why you always harassing me? You hassle me every time you see me. This stops today. And then they choke him to death. And then after choking him to death, they just let him lay there, give him no emergency medical treatment. Maybe they could have gotten his breathing going again. That they didn't even move on that and wrote it up like it was an everyday normal incident that they did nothing wrong. This happens too often. This is not an isolated incident. Just over the past few weeks, there have been exposés that 129 people who were imprisoned in Rikers Island prison were brutally beaten by the guards in an 11-month period. I mean, just brutally beaten, including beatings that were captured on videotape. None of the guards were punished in any way. If you've been watching online, you've seen a couple viral videos of Black women being beaten down by policemen. I mean, just brutally beaten down. And the police don't see no problem with it. They feel like they are doing their job. And unfortunately, it is often what they do. And we have to say no more to this. We have to say that we cannot stand by and watch people be criminalized, treated like they are guilty until proven innocent, if they can survive to prove their innocence. And we are acting to stop this. This is what we're going to be doing in October, and we want everybody to join us in that. You know, I'm a longtime revolutionary activist. I see this stuff as being built into the framework of this system, and I'm working for a revolution to get rid of this system. But look, everybody needs to get with this. If you see these horrors and you say that they need to be stopped, we've got ministers involved in this. There's rabbis. We're trying to get, you know, imams involved. We want to get everybody involved in this, young people, old people, Black and Latino people, white people, Asian people, because even if you know this isn't going to happen to you, can you stand aside and let this go down?
Well, yesterday I was watching a video by Noam Chomsky, who is one of the people that have signed on to this. You mentioned some other individuals, Alice Walker, Michelle Alexander, who wrote The New Jim Crow, and others who are supporting this call to action, which I think is a wonderful thing. And when I watched this video with Mr. Chomsky, it was very interesting to hear him lay out black history in terms of what's happened to black people since slavery. And he talks about scenarios where black life was criminalized in such a way that they could re-implement slavery without having to do so officially. But we all know that in the Constitution it does say that slavery is still legal in the United States if you've been convicted of a crime, which means that if I just find a way to criminalize your life, what you do, if I look at you and I say, okay, any man seen wearing a black hat is going to go to prison and he's going to get 20 years, then I can effectively make you a slave by really reshaping reality and convincing the world that wearing a black hat with glasses on is somehow a symptom that you're a bad person, that you need to be put away. And it's interesting because you're right. When people first hear about the incarceration issue, they say, well, if you don't want to deal with prison, then don't get in trouble, right? I'm sure you hear that a lot from black folks, because black people,
we hear that a whole lot.
There you go. We're very conservative, right? And but the issue is, number one, if you get in trouble, whatever that means, does the punishment fit the crime? Are you going to be treated fairly? Are you as likely to be stopped and searched as the rich white guy down on Wall Street? Probably not. Are you as likely to get a fair trial as the rich white guy down on Wall Street? Probably not. Are you equally likely to be incarcerated for that same crime as the rich guy down on Wall Street? Probably not, because many of us can't afford adequate representation. Many of us are being harassed by the police. And then that final question is, are you as likely to get the same sentence as the rich white guy down the street? The answer is no. And so you go down the whole chain of events, and you see a couple of things. And I want you to comment on this. You see, number one, the disparity. That the poor and that the black and brown people are getting worse outcomes in this criminal justice system than white people are, and this was by design. And then the other thing you see is the profitability. And Noel mentioned this, and he articulated this very well, that we've got to this point where prisons are so profitable. The incarcerating people is profitable. Arresting people is profitable. People are making money from this. And like Dr. Umar Johnson said this, and also in the new documentary Elementary Genocide, where they talk about the school to prison pipeline, they effectively say that young black people are being traded like commodities on Wall Street now. That there are people who are profiting from the demise of our children. Can you tell me more about that? And what are your thoughts?
People have to really look at this for what it is, because in preparing their figuring on how many prison cells they're going to need, they are looking at fourth grade reading scores and saying how many prison cells. I mean, here you got a kid like around 10 years old, and they're already projecting that they're going to be going to prison and building a cell for them. But then there are other things that make this happen, like marijuana. Blacks, whites, Latinos use marijuana in roughly the same percentages of their presence in the population. But then when you look at who gets arrested for marijuana, I mean, it's like in New York City, it is 85 to 90% blacks or Latinos who get arrested for marijuana possession. And that is not because, young brothers and sisters like to go around waving their blunts. It is because the law against it gets enforced only in those neighborhoods, and you get a pass somewhere else. You could look at the crack to powder cocaine disparity. Crack being viewed as an inner city drug, powder cocaine being viewed as a suburban, mostly white drug, and they put 100-to-1 sentencing disparity, which means 5 grams of crack cocaine would get you the same penalty as 500 grams of powder cocaine. In other words, the dealer of powder cocaine would get the same sentence as somebody who was trying to get high on crack. Now, when Obama came in, he said one of the things he was going to do was deal with that disparity. And he did do something. He reduced it from 100-to-1 to 18 to 1. But it is still the case that these drugs are chemically the same drug. They have the same property. So why is there any disparity?
And 18 to 1, that's still a horrible disparity. That means a 5-year sentence gets converted to 90 years. I mean,
Yeah, that's exactly
right.
that's
I mean,
exactly what it means.
18 to 1, excuse my French, but that ain't shit. I mean, that's horrible.
Yeah,
That
I
is a
got to go
very
to
bad
yeah.
disparity. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree. I got to go to Malcolm X on that. They stuck the knife deep in your back, pulled it a little bit out, and then you're supposed to be happy and celebrate your victories. Take the knife all the way out and then cure the wound that you caused. Don't take it a little bit out and expect me to thank you or nothing like that. So that's what we're dealing with. And see, I have called mass incarceration a slow genocide targeting Black and Latino people, and one that could become a fast one. And see, I say that not to hype it up or to excite people. I say that because I've studied what genocide actually is. And the definition of genocide, it isn't just when you line people up against the wall and start shooting them or throwing them in the gas oven. That's the end of the process of genocide.
Yes.
But the process begins with the identification of a group of people, the demonization of those people, the segregation of those people. Then you move to the process where they actually get exterminated. And we're in that process, and we cannot wait till the end, because when people say to me, you can't talk about genocide unless you're talking about the Holocaust, I say back to them, wouldn't it have been very good if someone had identified genocide going down against Jewish people before it got to the point of the ghettos and the gas chambers so that they could have fought to stop it? And that's what I'm trying to do today. I'm trying to sound the alarm on this, and we are acting to stop this, with October being a big leap in that movement. And people need to look at this, read Michelle Alexander's book. I want to check out this talk by Brother Chomsky. There's other things that people need to look at. Dr. Khalil Muhammad has written on the historic criminalization of blackness. People need to check that out and look at the current reality in that context and understand that the disparity in who's in jail and how long they're in jail is not flowing from the criminal activity of people, but the criminalization of people. And this is wrong, it's unfair, it's illegitimate, it must be stopped, and we are acting to stop it. And I call on everybody with just an ounce of justice in their heart to look at this and decide whether this is something that they can allow to go down in their names.
It's so funny. I don't often talk about this book, but it just came to mind that my second book that I wrote was called "What If George Bush Were a Black Man?" And I wrote this back in '04. I remember it was a hard book to write because a lot of people actually supported President Bush because we were at a time of war. And, that's a time where corporations make money, and it's also a time where the American people get behind their leader and whatever sinister motive they might have. And now that I think back on that, it's funny because we weren't really talking about mass incarceration as much, but I remember noticing from my own family when I was thinking about my deceased uncle, who was like an older brother to me, as a prototype in this book. And I thought about the fact that I said, oh my goodness, he's so much like George Bush, but yet his life was so different from President Bush's. He was in and out of jail. He was an alcoholic. He was homeless up until the day he died. And I thought to myself, I said, if you really look at America, we have a country where you have groups of people where their margin of error is just incredibly thin. If they make the same mistake that a young kid makes out in the suburbs, they're going to have consequences that are far more severe. And I think the marijuana thing is a perfect case in point on that. You see now where you've got, Michelle brought this up, where you've got wealthy white guys making millions of dollars from selling marijuana now, legally, and you still got black kids that are doing very, very serious hard time for possession of marijuana. I mean, that's an insane disparity. And then I think about Daryl Pageant, a brother I know who was sentenced to 40 years in prison.
Yeah, I'm familiar with his case, yeah.
Yes, for possession of 1 gram of crack cocaine. And Daryl, I was so proud of him because when I met him, I knew I was talking to a scholar. I said, I don't care what school you went to, you're smarter than me. And because Daryl had spent 20 years studying the law, and Daryl actually went to court and fought his own case and got his sentence reduced to 20 years, which still, as you mentioned before, that's really not a victory. I mean, the man still lost 20 years of his life, but it's a victory relative to what he was going to get. So I'm so proud of him. And one of the things that he brought up, and also Yarima Karam, and I'm asking you about this, another brother who got a lot of time, more time than he deserved for a similar drug offense, is they mentioned just the sheer fear and the constant threat of being in prison, that the torture coming from the guards, the fear that you could be sitting there eating lunch and somebody could stab you at any moment, the fact that you could die any day because people were dying there all the time. Urema talked about a brother in his cell who had fallen out because they changed his medication. He was dying, and he told the guard, "You're supposed to give him CPR," and the guard said, "I'm not doing that." You know, and you think so. I think that this prison torture thing is something that people need to know about as well. Can you talk a little bit about not just the fact that people are being incarcerated, but what's happening to them while they're in there? Why this is a breeding ground for mental illness?
Yes, I mean, there is really inhumane treatment being laid out, and in fact, 80,000 people in prison in the U.S. right now are being subjected to what is considered internationally torture. And that's long-term solitary confinement. People are being confined for weeks, months, years, and even decades in conditions where they are denied human contact. They're held in the cell for like 23 hours a day, and then they get released into a larger cell for exercise. Sometimes they get no sunlight. One brother, he had been held in solitary confinement so long that when his mother finally did get to see him when they released him, she did not recognize him because he was several shades lighter because he had been without sun for that long. And then sun is also necessary for vitamins and things like that. So his health had deteriorated. Then you have what you were talking about the arbitrary mistreatment by the guards, because one of the things about Obama's new pardon program, where he's going to pardon or consider eligible for pardons many more people, one of the planks of it is you have to have a clean record. And as somebody who did 2 years in Leavenworth Military Penitentiary for refusing to go to Vietnam, I looked at that and I said, that's going to cut a whole lot of people out. Because, you know, you get up in the morning, you walking into the cafeteria, and a guard is like, who you looking at? And like, you don't know what's happening. But if you don't give the right answer, then all of a sudden you're written up, you're thrown in the hole, all of that kind of stuff. And then there is the tension among the prisoners and the question of at any minute you might have to be defending your life. And even if you're acting in a totally legitimate way to defend yourself, you could then end up being in trouble if you survive the attack, because the other side of it is you might not survive. That's a situation that is really, it's an inhumane situation to put people in. And then when you consider that people are being warehoused in that situation, fundamentally because the system has no future for them, because that's where the rise in incarceration came. You know, from like 1971 to today, the incarceration numbers have risen more than 700%. And the other thing about that is that that's when the deindustrialization of the inner cities and then the whole country begin to take off. So they have these young black people and increasingly young Latinos that they have no future for, you know, and then your future becomes cops, courts, prisons. Jobs have disappeared, drugs appear as a way to survive, and then if you go with that, you get caught up in this prison thing. And even if you don't go with it, you might get caught up in it, because frame-ups are another thing that you know, a lot of brothers and sisters have to deal with. And then some of the crimes are just straight up poverty crimes. I mean, people have been being increasingly thrown into prison for failing to pay debts. You know, this is like actually happening. The old thing in the old English novels of debtors' prisons, well, that's coming back, because if you can't pay a fine, and your court costs, then you get thrown into jail until you pay off. But of course, if you're thrown in jail, you ain't going to be able to pay off, so you're going to end up doing time. I mean, and this is what we're dealing with, and it really must stop, and it is up to us to stop it. We can't leave it to, well, maybe Obama's going to do it as he goes out the door, because he's had 6 years to work on it, and it ain't happened. So we should be clear on that. And these politicians are saying, well, I'm going to work on this for you. It ain't been happening. We have to make it happen.
Absolutely. Well, let me spit out a couple of statistics that you
Okay.
share in your document that will eventually be shared with the public. You mentioned that America has 5% of the world's population, but 25% of its incarcerated citizens, or 25% of its prison inmates. And you also mentioned that 32% of black males between the ages of 20 and 29 are in prison, on probation, or on parole. And it sounds to me like the genocide that you describe isn't just beginning. It isn't just a theoretical hypothesis. It has not only started, but it's well underway.
Yes,
Uh,
it's true.
and really, I would even argue that the genocide from mass incarceration has been greater in terms of scope and impact than the genocide that occurred in World War II. I'll say that to the end of time, because if you look at the millions of people that are affected, you look at how many black folks can say, my daddy went to prison, my sister went to prison, my uncle went to prison, and you look at the fallout, you look at the broken families, the missing fathers in the homes, you look at the violence that occurs. You think about the drug war, for example, and just the magical appearance of drugs in black communities, not in other communities, but in our communities. What did you see? You saw us going to prison for the drugs. You saw us getting addicted to the drugs, and you saw us dying in the violence related to the drugs. And then those who didn't get affected by the first three had to live with the trauma of seeing all this happen all around them. So
Mhm.
what's that going to do to a community? I mean, it's unbelievable. And I think that and this I'll tell people why I support you, and then I'm gonna let you get the last word. I support you because we have to believe in this. We have to fight for equity and justice in this. We cannot look at at prison inmates as them versus us. Because the them can be the you, just with the change of a law, or with a police officer looking at you the wrong way, or somebody planting drugs on you, or somebody an officer deciding to harass you, or you just getting caught in the legal system and not being able to afford a good enough attorney. You think about how many people go to prison not because they did anything wrong, but because they were accused of something and had to take a plea bargain because they were facing 30 years if they
Yeah.
fought in the court of law in a situation where they're not going to be judged by a jury of their peers. And so I'll lay this out, and then I promise I'll stop talking. You have to forgive me, brother. I'm so excited about what you're doing, and that's why all this yapping's coming out. But I'm looking at the process as a trail, right? You start with the school to prison pipeline. Kids get into school. You're already treating them like inmates. You got the metal detectors at school. You got the security guards. You got kids getting put in handcuffs at the age of 4. All this is preparing them for prison. So they finally get into the system because they're not being well educated, which again is not an accident, which is why I think black children have to be educated by black people most of the time. So they get into the system. They can't afford adequate defense, so they're going to take a plea, or they're going to end up being sent to prison. They're going to get a longer sentence than everyone else. And once you're in the system, you're kind of stuck. The system doesn't want to let you go. There's too much money they're making off of you at that point. So you get into prison. You're subjected to torture, maybe prison rape, which is another issue we haven't even had a chance to get to. You're subjected to all kinds of other forms of inhumane treatment, and you're not being prepared to live a productive life once you get out. So you're probably going to be worse once you get out in many cases than you were when you went in, just as a matter of mere survival. I know that if I had to spend time in prison, I would become a different person, because you have to be a different person to survive. So then when you get out, what's waiting for you on the other end after you've done that 15, 20 years for a crime that the rich white guy wouldn't have gotten any time for? So you get out. Is there a job waiting for you? No. Is there, or not a decent job? Is there an educational opportunity waiting for you? Probably not. Is there an opportunity for you to live the life that they told you should have lived as a so-called productive American citizen, whatever that means? No, it's not. Why? Because they want you to go back to prison, because you're now part of this economic machine that they've built. So you look at the poison that's just sprinkled all throughout the process in the lives of black and brown and poor children. It's absolutely sickening. Can you comment on that? I know I didn't ask you a
Yeah.
specific question, but I'm sure you
Okay.
have thoughts that came from that.
I mean, there's just two things I want to say on this. One is that you go to prison, and when you come out, it is stacked to send you back because you get out, you got a you got a beef on your record, you got a crime on your record. You go to get a job, you check the box that you've been in jail, and where do you think your application's going to go? You
Mm,
don't check that box, and then they find out later you were in jail, they can fire you for having lied on that. So your job situation is really very tenuous, if existing at all.
mm,
Even worse, there are some things you can learn to do in prison, like barbering or beauty salon, that kind of stuff. But in many states, you cannot get a license to be a barber or a beautician if you have a felony conviction. Explain that one to me, except that you're trying to cut people off from any kind of decent life. Then public housing. You can't live in that if you've got a felony conviction. You can't get a government loan for education or to start a business if you got a felony conviction. I mean, a lot of states, they don't even let you vote. So they're really setting it up to send you back in. And that's part of why I say this is a genocide. It is actually making it impossible for black people and large sections of Latinos to survive and thrive as peoples. The other thing I want to say and I want to stress is that you send a brother or a sister to jail and you've caught a whole family up. Because a lot of folks, including, you know, President Obama, talk about the absent black fathers. Well, too many of those black fathers are in jail, and that's why they're absent. And we've already talked about what gets them in jail and how illegitimate, unfair, and racist that is. So there's that. But you take a brother or sister to jail, then there are often children involved in that. There are
mm,
parents involved in it. You got people who are like, can I pay my bills or do I want to take that hundreds of mile trek to go visit my loved one? You get robbed if you want to make a phone call because these businesses bid for a monopoly on the contracts, and then they just charge you exorbitant fees for a phone call that don't really cost nothing. And we know now that phone calls don't cost nothing by the way that the cell phones do it. They just charge you nothing for all them calls you want to make. Okay, so you're basically setting it up so that it is difficult for people to maintain contact, to keep those family ties together. And you're catching up because when you look at the numbers of people in prison, you're literally talking about tens of millions of people when you add in the loved ones of all those people and all of the people who have done their sentences but are still treated as less than full citizens. That's 5 million people. It's more than 2 million people in prison. That's 7 million. But you put in their loved ones, you've got tens of millions of people whose lives are caught up in the criminal injustice system in this country. That is illegitimate. It is unfair. It is racially disparate, and it needs to be stopped. And that's what we're doing in October. And then there's room for everybody. There's going to be sermons in religious institutions. So if you're a congregant, at a mosque, at a church, at a synagogue, you can say to your religious leader, we should take part in this. You go to a college or a high school, plan an event at your school. If you're in the arts, work on some art projects. If you don't like this, hook up with us to demonstrate, around police brutality and police murder. Wear orange to symbolize your solidarity with this movement. We have set it up so that all kinds of people can get involved at whatever level. And then the other thing I do have to say is we need to raise a lot of funds to do this because like they used to say back in the old days, freedom ain't free. And I've learned that that's really true. So people could contribute money. And the way people can learn how they could get hooked up with this, what's going on, any questions that they have, they can go to the website stopmassincarceration.net. That's stopmassincarceration, all one word, no punctuation, .net. Check it out, get more information, but most importantly, get involved, because you are needed and there is a place for you if you want to stop mass incarceration. If you saw that video of Eric Garner getting choked and said, this stops today, like Eric Garner was saying, this stops today, then go to that website, get involved, get in touch, and let us stop this madness.
All right. Well, I love it. Well, it does stop today, and then again, I guess it also starts today. The battle begins, and it's time to stand up for what we believe in, and I believe in everything that you're doing here, and you've got my full support, sir. And everybody who's watching, I want you to go to Mr. Dix's website, go to stopmassincarceration.net. Don't just go visit and say, I agree with you. Please pull some money out of your pocket, $5, $10, $20. You're going to spend $150 at Walmart or at the grocery store and all these other places that don't care anything about your community. But I can tell you that this man and this movement is going to put money into your community and really do something that's going to make your community better. If you're sick of the violence we have to deal with mass incarceration, if you're sick of what's happening with our children, you gotta give to this mass incarceration movement. If you're wondering where all the missing black fathers are in the household, which we know that's debatable, because we know that black men want to be fathers too. We love our children as much as everybody else, but we're dealing with something here that's very, very real. You are in the middle of a Holocaust. And the best way to get past you with this Holocaust is to convince you that everything's okay. So don't fall asleep. We got to wake up. Let's support this brother. Thank you so much, Mr. Dix. I truly appreciate everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Brother Boyce, for having me on.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. This is Mr. Carl Dix. Give you the website one more time: stopmassincarceration.net. He is the co-founder of the Stop Mass Incarceration Network, along with Dr. Cornel West. He's got lots of people already supporting this movement, from Michelle Alexander to Alice Walker to Noam Chomsky and many others, and myself as well. Please join this movement. Please don't just watch the video. Please get involved. Be active. Let's go on the attack. Let's be determined. That's all I'm going to say. So I'm going to stop talking now. I'll let you get back to your day. Thank you, brother. And thank you, everybody watching. And until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone. Peace.